Welcome to the Hockey Writers Fantasy Forecheck. I'm your host, Caleb Kerney.
And I am Jacob Strozyk.
We're going to be talking to you about all things fantasy, Keeper League, Redraft, and Dynasty. Thanks for tuning in with us this week. We're going to give you hot players to pick up, prospects that are on the rise, sleepers you should or shouldn't think of acquiring, and prospects who are looking to break out at the NHL level. This week's topic is going to be going through tips on drafting prospects in redraft leagues. Jacob, why don't you kick us off and tell us about some hot players?
Yeah, so one of the big ones I want to talk about is Florida Panthers forward Sam Reinhart. He's been just on an absolute tear and is the complete opposite of what he was doing at the start of the year, which was absolutely nothing. So it's extremely refreshing as a fantasy owner to have him finally producing at a rate that's much more in line with what his usual numbers are. He had a 7-game point streak from January 10th until January 21st. He has 13 points in his last 11 games. He gets a lot of power play time. He gets a lot of time playing with Barkov, and he's always going to be that kind of top line guy, but he's somebody that was in the sit category earlier this year. He's definitely in the start category right now.
Absolutely. I mean, like past 5 games, he's been playing 19, 21 minutes a night. He's got 5 points in his past 5 games, 14 shots, 5 hits. It's looking good for Reinhart right now. His secondary assists are actually a little bit lower than what his career average is. Right now, it's 27% on the year. His career average is about 36%. So there's some room for positive regression there to start getting those sort of extra assists, especially on the power play or whatever, like Jacob was saying, playing with Barkov. So, and even his just general shooting percentage, 13% this year. His career is 14%. So he's a little bit less lucky than he normally is. So definitely look for some positive regression there. And Jacob, do you have a defenseman on this list or goalie? Why don't you tell us about the next
one? I do. I have New Jersey Devils defenseman Dougie Hamilton. The guy has been absolute dynamite since the start of the new year. He has 16 points since the start of the year, and that's a total of 13 games up to this point. He has 5 multi-point games, and as a defenseman, that's just absolutely nuts to hear about. He is easily their best defenseman, so he's getting all of their top time, and he's getting a good amount of shots to go with it as well. He's getting about 3.5 shots per game, so he's someone that's a little bit more as far as star power goes. You probably already had him. There's very little chance that he's on a waiver wire to pick up or something, but if you're looking to sell high on a player, he's someone you could definitely do that with right now.
Yeah, and just to touch on the selling high, that could be a way to go, especially with his injury history. Because it's difficult. He's found it difficult to stay healthy for a full 82 game season. So there is some risk attached, but he's definitely been dynamite last 4 games. He's got 8 points, 3 goals, 5 assists, 21 shots, 3 hits. So definitely some category coverage there. A little light on the hits, but he more than makes up for it with his points and his shots. And Dougie's just so good. And speaking of some players that I think are so good, are these prospects on the rise. And I've got some two Swedes for the listeners today. The first one I got is William Wallinder, who is a Detroit Red Wings prospect. He's not signed right now, but he's presently playing with Marco Kasper and Rogel BK. In 38 games played so far this year, he's got 5 goals, 18 assists, total of 23 points, 88 shots. He's getting about, 2.5 shots a game, which is really good to see, especially with a 20-year-old in a men's league like that. He's averaging about 22 minutes of time on ice, and he's gotten at least 25 minutes at least 7 times this year. So that's about 20% of the games played that he's had this year. He's reached that mark of 25 minutes. And on top of that, he's on their power play a lot, about 2.5 minutes of power play time on ice. So a lot of opportunity here for Wallinder. He's got good size, 6'4". He's about between 180, 190 right now. Definitely will play AHL minutes next year, and could get a call up during the year. Most likely will kind of follow the pattern that we've kind of seen with Seider and now with Edvinsson, of spending a year in the AHL and then probably trying, getting a chance to crack the NHL lineup. Jacob, you got any thoughts on Wallinder?
You kind of covered the base of how he works, but I'll touch on the fact that he's in the Detroit system. So yes, he's going to have a lot of promise. Yzerman has a great history of picking good players early on in the draft. So the way the Detroit system usually works is they don't want to rush them immediately to the NHL unless there is some very specific high-level reason to bring them up. They're still technically a rebuilding team. They're kind of bringing everything to fruition now as they kind of develop all their players, and he's no exception. He will get that time in the AHL. He's not going to be jumping up to the NHL right away, but he will be the kind of player that they'll need to call up during the course of a season. Probably not this year at all, but next year there's definitely some high chance of that. So if you have a much deeper league where you have the chance to pick him up, not a terrible idea.
100%. Is one of those things with prospects when you're drafting prospects in dynasty leagues and looking at prospects. We've mentioned it before, and you've probably heard it on other podcasts. You want to get prospects that are in good systems. Detroit is a good system. Yzerman's, trying to mimic the success that he had in Tampa, and you want those prospects that are in good systems. Like Detroit's a good one, Columbus is a good one, and Minnesota's a good one, which leads us to our next prospect, the Swedish phenom goaltender Jesper the Wallstedt. This season so far, he's got in 22 games played, 2.57 goals against, 914 save percentage, 11 wins, 7 losses, 3 overtime losses, 1 shutout. This is all in the AHL. He kind of struggled a little bit in his first 5 to 10 games or so in the AHL, but has really bounced back in a big way in his last 6 games played. He's got 6 wins, 1.00 goals against, and 966 save percentage. So the guy's just turning it up. He plays a very controlled style. He's always square to the puck. A similar style maybe to like a Price or a Lundqvist. Whether or not he gets to that point kind of obviously remains to be seen. Some people have some question marks about him because Detroit had a chance to draft him. They have a lot of scouts in Sweden, so they think, something kind of felt off about him. Personally, I think Wallstedt might have a longer career than Kosa, but when Kosa comes in, he might make a bigger splash. He's a bigger body. Wallstedt, he's not small. He's 6'3", so he's got some decent size, but he's just always square to the shot, always square to the puck, and it's tough not to cheer for the guy. So when you take into consideration the adjustment period, obviously that was sort of needed because in the SHL, the rink size is different, so the angles are different. So the fact that it took him some games to get acclimated makes sense. But someone who should be acclimated to their new team and is the first cold streak sleeper that you might want to consider picking up or not picking up, Who do we got, Jacob?
Yeah, so biggest one on the list to date, probably the biggest star player we have on here. We're going to talk about Vegas Golden Knights forward Jack Eichel. My word, if there was definition of ice cold, he is currently in the dictionary under it. He has 1 point in his last 8 games, and it is just an assist. He is -8 within that same span of time. He's still getting all of his top line ice time. He is still getting shots, but he's a defensive liability. He's not a physical player, so he doesn't throw a lot of hits. So right now, you're getting absolutely nothing out of him fantasy-wise, and a lot of people are probably frustrated at that fact, considering Mark Stone is still out. So there's plenty of opportunity for him to step up and kind of be that guy again. But right now, if you have a choice between starting somebody and sitting somebody, Eichel absolutely needs to be on your sit list right now until you start seeing some improvement from just his overall numbers. It could be a stroke of bad luck. Some people are saying it's an effort problem. I don't really see it too much as that. I just see it as he just can't personally get anything going for himself. He's a little bit snake bitten. So I'd say sit him till he heats up.
Yeah, 100%. Sit him till he heats up. If you're in the market for, a good center in your league, he's definitely a buy low candidate. I would either of these two guys, I would pick Eichel as a buy low and a bounce back guy. We got the All-Star break coming up here right away. So definitely potential there for him to just kind of have a personal reset and just collect himself, get his game going. He still is providing some value in category leagues right now. In his past 4 games, he's got 16 shots, 2 hits. So I think I agree with Jacob that it's not an effort problem. 4 shots in each of his last 4 games. That doesn't tell me that it's an effort problem. None of his metrics are too high or too low as far as secondary assists percentage and shots per game, obviously, and shooting percentage. Everything is just kind of in line with what he normally does. Just a bit of bad luck. And there's somebody else, I think, who's experiencing a little bit of bad luck. Jacob, why don't you tell us about the next one?
Yeah, the next one we're going to go through is LA Kings forward Victor Arvidsson. When he was brought in, he was meant to be a good, consistent scoring forward, and for the most part, he has been throughout the year. But right now, he's really in that same rut that Eichel is. He's got 1 point in his last 7 games. He doesn't have great shooting metrics off of anything right now. He's not playing super well defensively. He's not getting a lot of hits. He's not really giving you any reason to want to either pick him up off of waiver wire, because he's someone that you could, but he's also not giving you any reason to start him either. So I would highly recommend treating him the same that you would Jack Eichel right now and sitting him, or selling him low and maybe packaging him into something and moving him out, since he has been really cold as of late.
Yeah, of all those options, I think packaging him together, packaging him with something to pick up like an Eichel, I would consider that 100%. Eichel, pick it back up. Arvidsson, very streaky player. He's not playing top line. Eichel is playing top line. Eichel is getting those like premium minutes. Arvidsson isn't getting bad minutes, but he's just not on the same level. But some guys who seem to be getting to a really good NHL level, or are just doing really weird, interesting things, is my prospect breakout candidates. For this week, I've got 2 guys. This first guy is from Columbus. He's got the weirdest stat line in hockey right now, Kirill Marchenko. This guy apparently only scores goals. Okay. He's got 13 goals in 27 games. He's averaging about 13 and a half time on ice. In his past 4 games played, he's got 4 goals, 8 shots, 4 hits. So he's getting a bit of category coverage there. You know, in his last 3 games, he's really been seeing more ice time, seeing more time on the top line, even lining up with Jenner and Gaudreau. You know, he's played 16 minutes, 20 seconds, and 19 minutes in his past 3 games. So really picking it up there. And I don't know what to make of this guy that only scores goals. Like, obviously, he's going to get assists. He will get assists. Are they going to be this year? I don't know. But with Columbus in the position that they are, rebuilding and getting, you know, lined up to get a premium top guy in this year's entry draft, it could be Fantilli, it could be Bedard. It's hard not to like the prospect of Marchenko just getting fed by one of those guys and just sniping it home. Jacob, what do you think of this Marchenko guy?
I'm just going to say this about him. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a player who mainly scores goals. I have said it for many, many years. I would rather have a 40 goal, 0 assist player than a 0 goal, 40 assist player. It's worth far more fantasy wise. It is worth far more just in general. And there is basically 0 downside to somebody who's just going to throw up a bunch of goals for your team, especially if they're only playing on your second or third line. If they keep putting up goals instead of assists, you know, it might be a streak problem, but you know, at the end of the day, at any point, this guy's just going to throw up some ridiculous shot and it's going to go in the back of the net. So you can't really complain about somebody like that too much.
The second wild prospect, or I'm kind of bending my own personal rules with this one a little bit. But we're going to talk about Matt Boldy next. And I think it's fair to say that he is like officially established himself in the Wild organization as a top 6 player. He just signed a contract extension. And I think like 2 or 3 years into this contract, it's going to be insane value. Might seem a little high right now, but it's going to be insane value in 2-3 years. You know, in his last 3 games, he's got 3 goals, 3 assists, 13 shots, 1 hit. You know, over the course of the season, he's getting just under 4 minutes of power play time on ice, which is almost a full minute and a half more than what he got last year. He's already matched his goal total from last year. He's got 1 more goal than last year, actually. And he's already eclipsed his shot total from last year. He played 47 games last year. He's played 48 this year. His assists are down from last year, but his time on ice is also up in general, 2.5 minutes more than last year. He's up at just shy of 18 minutes a night. And this kid is going to be something special. He is definitely, Boldy is the type of prospect that I would draft in a redraft league. And that's a perfect segue to our topic of the week. When should you draft a prospect for your redraft league? There's definitely situations where you should and where you shouldn't. Because of how finicky prospects can be, you want to make sure that you're getting somebody who's going to actually produce and not somebody who's just there as just kind of like a feeling out to see if they will work. So Jacob, why don't you tell us about maybe a situation where you drafted a prospect in your redraft league, or what are some things you look for in prospects, in potential prospects when you're thinking of drafting them in a redraft league?
Yeah, so when it comes to any prospect, from forwards, you want to look at how much ice time are they getting, what's the potential for their team overall, will they be getting opportunities, and will they actually stay with the team? Because forwards can be a little tough in that regard, where if they don't quite make it right off the bat, they can get sent back to juniors, or they're going to spend a lot of time down in the minor leagues, or they might get sent back to Europe, depending on where the prospect is from. But more than not, you want to look at the team that they're on and the opportunity that they have to actually contribute something. Somebody like Matt Boldy, who has a good team to play on and already has what it looks like to be chemistry with his line mates. He has great potential. He's a good scoring forward. So he has all the skills to actually contribute something to that team. Then you can kind of look at the opposite end of it. Somebody like Shane Wright, who started off the year, everybody was saying, hey, he's going to go number 1 overall, and then he didn't. He went at 4, and the Kraken put him on the starting lineup, and then he never played more than 10 minutes per night. He didn't really have the opportunity to contribute anything. He has the skills for sure. He has the pedigree to actually contribute something, but on a team that was getting as deep as the Kraken were, Wright just wasn't in the cards. He wasn't in the equation enough to be a scoring fantasy factor. So it was probably tough for some people to say, hey, he's going to do great on this team. He's probably going to play top minutes, and then he didn't. So instead, grabbing somebody like Boldy, or if people were looking at the Kraken specifically, grabbing a player like Matty Beniers, he is playing those top minutes. He is contributing in that top role. He's a very good player and still my personal pick for who's going to ultimately win the Calder. But then if you get to the more defensive side, defensemen move a lot more than the forwards do. A lot less than the forwards do, because stability and consistency from your defensemen, especially rookie defensemen, is key. And you're not really going to get much offensive explosions out of rookie defensemen pretty much ever. So the fact that Cale Makar did it a bunch of years ago, just pretend that didn't happen, because that's one of the most anomalous things that could ever go on as far as a breakout star defenseman is concerned. Development is a lot slower these days amongst players, and that's okay. So it might not be worth grabbing these guys super early in a redraft. It's much more worth it if you have those couple of picks in the lower portions of your draft to say, all right, they have the chance to play. They have the skills to actually put pucks in the back of the net, or they have the skills to actually be blocking shots if they're a defenseman or getting good ice time. Then they're going to be worth something that's a little bit more deeper down your line.
100%. And I think that would be the key takeaway for when you should draft a prospect in your redraft league, is your last 2 or 3 picks in your draft, you isolate a couple targets that are going to be rookies, prospects who are looking to start the year with their team, but they're not going to be foundational to the success of your team. Big potential with these guys who, there's always the risk that they're not going to stay around. So just picking those guys in the last couple rounds, where if you need to, you can just drop them for somebody on the waiver wire who's hot that week. If you have the strategy of sort of a streamer spot, that's basically where you're drafting these guys, unless it's like a Matty Beniers. I think that pick is spot on. Beniers is exactly Beniers and Boldy. Those are exactly the type of players you want to get. Even somebody like Jake Sanderson or JJ Moser, who they get a lot of peripheral categories. So if those are weighted really well in your points leagues, or if you're in a category league, those kind of guys are up with their consistent play in that regard. The ice time is super important, which is why a guy like Moser is so intriguing, because he's, playing 22 minutes a night. So there's a lot of potential to get those counting stats, as we like to call them, stats where it's like the more you're on the ice, the more likely you will get those stats. And like, even an example from last year is like using one of those last picks on like a Cole Sillinger. You know, he was drafted last year, made Columbus out of camp, and he made a pretty decent impact. And especially if you took him in like your last pick of your draft or second last pick of your draft, really good value. And if there was some, guy on the waiver wire who was outperforming him, you could pick him up and drop Sillinger and probably pick him up later because most people weren't really thinking about him. So that's definitely some good advice there about that. And now we also Jacob also sort of laid out some reasons why you shouldn't draft a prospect in your redraft league. And I think like the number one reason to not draft a prospect, and it's tough to like gauge this before the season, but their time on ice is so important, right? Like Jacob touched on it with Shane Wright playing, not like less than 10 minutes a night. Like that is beyond less than ideal. That is, as soon as they get one game of that, you drop them and you pick somebody else up. Yeah, that's Jacob. Do you have any thoughts on that, or some other reason why you might not draft a prospect in your redraft league?
Well, you kind of touched on one of the main key points that's really great about prospects in redraft leagues. It is the fact that you can just kind of drop them at a moment's notice because you can just go and pick up somebody else that's going to be in there. So they are very low risk, high reward in that regard. But for that same reason, there's always players deeper in drafts that you can still pick up that will contribute consistently in categories or in a scoring way, or even from the goaltending position. You can always find decent goaltenders late in some drafts because some people just refuse to take them early on. And that's all dependent again on how your league scoring works. But there might be that one gem player that makes the difference on your team in that late portion of the draft that might be more worth taking than those prospects, because you don't know, like you said, you don't really know how they're going to be used on the ice by that team when the year is really starting.
Yeah.
Great example at the start of this year. Kent Johnson in the preseason was playing top minutes in Columbus, but then as soon as things started getting rolling during the year, his ice time just dropped. It's not necessarily to the extreme that Wright is, because Johnson is still obviously playing there and he's still putting up, a decent number of points, but he wasn't in the role that was kind of being advertised for him when the year started. So it's tough to weigh that kind of an option. But if you pay attention to those things, sometimes it will work out in that favor. Maybe if things went a little bit differently, Johnson would have stayed on that top unit and been playing with Gaudreau for a good portion of the year. And if things kind of, lit up between the two, then Columbus probably would have had a much better start to the year and would be doing a little bit better now. But it's tough to gauge that just overall because you don't know how that prospect's talents are going to transfer to the NHL. So fantasy-wise, it's a gamble. It's an absolute gamble. But if it does work, and this is probably one of the most capital ifs in all of fantasy, if it does work, then that can be the difference between I'm making the playoffs this year or I'm on the outside looking in.
Absolutely, Jacob. I agree with that all 100%. Great point about going for taking that chance in those last couple picks of your draft on a boom bust player. You always have the safety net, but there's always going to be somebody on the waiver wire who has consistently shown that they produce in several different areas. So don't get hung up on prospects. They're big, shiny toys. Unless they're playing top 6 minutes or top 4 minutes if they're a defenseman, generally stay away from them. And that's all the time that we have today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Next week, we will be talking about streaky players, when to hold them, when to fold them. So make sure you tune in for that discussion. You can follow us on social media. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at capital THWF, lowercase ANTASY. I'm on Twitter at Caleb Scouting. Jacob, do you have Twitter? Do you tweet?
I do have Twitter. I sometimes tweet. My @ is Strozyk7. You can also find me under Dr. Ice Tilt.
Perfect. If you are watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the Hockey Writers YouTube channel. If you are listening in podcast format, subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review on whatever platform you listen to. You've been listening to the Hockey Writers Fantasy Forecheck. Keep your stick on the ice, get pucks in deep, and give it 110%, eh? See you next week.